KCBS, in partnership with UCSF Health, presents As Prescribed, a weekly conversation with leading medical experts from UCSF Medical Center and UCSF Benioff Children's Hospitals.
Hello and welcome to As Prescribed. I'm Kathy Novak. We had hoped that a lot of the social isolation associated with the pandemic was behind us, but now the Delta variant might have people thinking twice about getting together with others, especially if they are in high-risk groups. But being too isolated can also cause its own set of health problems. Dr. Ashwin Kotwal is Assistant Professor of Medicine in the Division of Geriatrics at UCSF, and he has been looking into how loneliness affects seniors. Dr. Kotwal, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kathy.
Now, this issue of loneliness was an issue for seniors even before the pandemic, right?
That's right. I think many of us, as clinicians, we were really concerned about an epidemic of loneliness even before the pandemic started. And ever since the pandemic, social restrictions started, shelter-in-place orders were put into place. We've been really concerned that loneliness and isolation have been amplified among seniors in the U.S.
And this does have flow-on effects. You've been looking into not only the loneliness itself, but how likely it is that older adults who say they are lonely would use prescription medication. What did you find there?
That's right. We were really interested in understanding the downstream effects, the downstream health effects of loneliness. Loneliness is known to be deeply intertwined in many of the physical and psychological symptoms older adults can experience. Things like pain, difficulty sleeping, depression, anxiety. And so we were interested in understanding whether loneliness might also relate to downstream use of medications to treat more severe symptoms. We found that loneliness is associated with much higher rates of things like pain medicines, opioids, nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, antidepressants, anxiolytics, things like benzodiazepines, Valium, many things that might help people get to sleep. And so we found that there are a number of medications that people should watch out for among individuals who are lonely.
And can you talk a little bit more about why they should watch out for them and what other alternatives might be to those medications?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, oftentimes when people are coming into clinic, we're seeing what might be the downstream effect of loneliness. We're seeing the pain, we're seeing the difficulty sleeping, and we may not be asking as much about what might be the root cause of some of those issues. Loneliness often can lead to some of these symptoms, or at the very least, amplify some of these symptoms. Pain may have been mild, but during the pandemic, you don't have your traditional sources of where you can turn to cope with that pain. You might not have your grandchildren to distract you from your back pain. You may not be able to share a meal with your neighbor or go out for a walk like you usually did. And so what might have been pain that was typically relieved by something like Tylenol now might be something you're really focused on and may have gotten worse, requiring a stronger pain medication. So that might be what clinicians are seeing. And so what we suggest is to really think about loneliness as well, to think about people's social connections and whether there's something we can do to address those needs in addition to addressing the physical or psychological things that they're presenting with.
So how do you do that? How do you address those needs and make people feel less lonely when it is so hard to connect and when we're being told, especially as I said, the Delta variant is causing a whole new set of worries, even among fully vaccinated older adults, if they are particularly at a high risk? How can they balance that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's not easy. It's not easy, especially during the pandemic, especially when we're facing so much uncertainty about, what is safe, what can we go back to doing normally. What I do and what I encourage listeners and families and friends to do is to ask about loneliness. One of the double-edged swords here about the pandemic is people are maybe feeling more lonely, but so many people are experiencing that it's become a lot more normal. Some of the stigma surrounding discussing loneliness has gone away. So I typically ask people, do you feel lonely? And if people are answering that they're frequently feeling that way, I ask them what might help. Sometimes people have a great understanding of what would make a difference, what would help them feel less lonely. And so we can start there.
What if the answer is, I would feel less lonely if I saw my grandchild, but the grandchild is not vaccinated. You're worried about the grandparent who might be exposed. Where do you draw that line?
Yeah, those are not simple situations. As a clinician, I think about what are some of the alternatives we can do. We sometimes will brainstorm together about what are the other social programs that might be available in the city. If I'm not exactly sure what's the right fit, because for everybody there might be a different fit. There might be something that makes the most sense for them. Sometimes I'll brainstorm with other people, the social workers, community health workers. There's some fantastic programs in San Francisco. So sometimes it's just a matter of connecting people to the right resource.
And
now, when people want to visit, their grandmother or someone who we might worry about higher risks from the Delta variant or COVID-19 in general, I think it's about weighing the trade-offs here. What are the risks and benefits? The benefits are increasingly being shown of social connections, right? We know that it helps people's mental health, that it can be important for cognition it's cognitively stimulating to be around others. And even for physical health, it's important. People tend to be more physically active, which can reduce their fall risk or other physical issues. So we know that there's a lot of benefits there. What are the risks? Well, we're all worried about breakthrough infections. COVID-19's risks have been, well documented. But there are a lot of things we can also do to mitigate that risk. I would say if someone wants to visit their older family member who is unvaccinated, they should absolutely get vaccinated. That is the biggest thing we can do to reduce risk. Other things, having activities outdoors, wearing masks, and nobody wants to go back to all the virtual social interactions that we've been doing. But sometimes that's what we need. Sometimes that can supplement in-person interactions in a way that can really make a difference.
All right, great advice. And it sounds like also for all of us, elderly or not, we should be telling people if we feel lonely and getting some kind of help and some kind of interaction there. Dr. Kotwal, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kathy, for having me.
Dr. Ashwin Kotwal is Assistant Professor of Medicine in the Division of Geriatrics at UCSF, and I'm Kathy Novak. Thanks so much for tuning in to As Prescribed.
As Prescribed, every Thursday at 1:30, right here on the Bay Area's news station, All News 106.9 and AM 740 KCBS, and streaming on the Odyssey app. The proceeding was sponsored by UCSF.